Welcome back to this tutorial series where we want to talk about Blender for Cinema 4D artists. My name is Helge Maus from Pixeltrain. In this tutorial I want to talk about texts and the fonts inside of Blender, and fonts and texts are a really strong part of Cinema 4D, so it's really interesting to see what Blender has to offer and how Blender thinks about text objects. There are some differences but also some similarities. This tutorial will cover a lot of topics, so I want to briefly tell you what I want to show you. I want to show how to change font, how to work with paragraphs and layouts, also how to add more than one material on a text, how we add fonts on curves, and how to prepare fonts or text objects for deformation later. And in the end of the tutorial I also want to show you a free add-on which I use for easier working with fonts from your system. So a full pack tutorial, let's get started. Let's get rid here of the cube, and if you want to add text or font inside of Blender, we have our own object here. It's a text object. You find it under Shift A or in the Add menu. And after adding this text object here, you see it's its own object. So you have your own icon in the list. And you can now rotate the text if you like every other object inside of Blender in the properties or with your rotation tool, for example. I find text here on the ground plane okay for my case, so I go a little bit closer to the text. And the first thing you have to understand if you take now a look into the text here is that Blender uses vector text. So for Blender, a text object is really similar to curves. And so we have some of the same options which you have on the curve tools, which we want to talk about in one of the next lessons. So now to change the text itself, we can use the edit mode. So if you tap while the text is here selected, you are now in edit mode, and it's a special edit mode where you can now type your text. And I type something here a little bit longer. Okay. Something like that. And if you have finished your text, you can now leave the edit mode by pressing the tab key. If you now want to render this text, you don't have to do anything because these are closed curves and Blender is able to render closed curves. So I position my camera here, for example, in this angle here. I press Ctrl-Alt-0. You've learned this in one of the last tutorials of mine. And I go a little bit back here to see it better, and if you now render, you will see that this text is directly visible because it's a surface for Blender. Great. But if you now go a little bit closer here, for example, to this part of the curve where it's rounded, you will see that it looks a little bit jagged here in the viewport, and also if you render this here also in the rendering. Let's do it. You see here, you see this faceted look. The reason for this is that Blender has to make polygons while the render process is running. Out of that here, let's hide the camera with the H key for a moment and select the text back. And to change now the resolution, you can go here into the text properties and you start here under shape. Here's the resolution of the curve, and it's 12 in the moment. 0 in the render options mean that it uses the same like in the viewport. And if you lower that, you will see that the curve is undersampled and it looks really jagged. And if you increase this value, it gets rounder and rounder and nicer. So this is a quality option which you can use. You can divide this between the preview and the renderer, but in my case, I think, yeah, something like 18 is okay. If then the text is filled here, you can say on which side it has to be filled or if it's not filled. And if the fill makes your computer slow while you're in editing mode, you can tick here fast editing. So if I now go to the edit mode, it's filled. But if you tick here fast editing, you only see outlines. But in the rendering, you still have then here your filled mode. Let's go a little bit deeper here through the options. The next one is the texture space. You get UVs for your text, but if you want to change them, you can change here the options in the texture space if you like. Then we have here the geometry. And if you take a look into the curve objects, you will see that we have here the same options. So if you now want to extrude this text, it's a matter of changing here the extrude amount. I hold down my shift key to make it slower, and then I click here and extrude now my text out. And you see now we have a 3D text here. If you now want to have nice bevels, we can use the bevel option here. Same thing. We change the depth here. Okay, it increases a little bit. Can change here the resolution. And if you want to offset here the extrude, for example, you can do it here. So you can shrink down your text again a little bit so that it looks a little bit better in our case here. In the next section here now, we have the font. And if you come from Cinema 4D, this looks really annoying, because if you now tick here, for example, the font drop down, you only see one font. The reason for this is the Blender font. It's built into Blender. And if you now want to add other fonts, you have to assign them here. This text in the moment is completely written in regular, so it uses Blender font for everything. And if you want to change this now, I can click here this little folder icon, and I go into my fonts menu here, or let's try a font which I have downloaded here. First go to desktop, you see I've downloaded a OTF font, so an open type font. You select this, click open font, and you see it works directly like this here. And if you want to use your system fonts, you can go long route here to go first here to this folder, then you go to your fonts. I have it here in my favorites. You see the new file view is really cool because the previews also shows the fonts, which is really nice. Let's take a font here. I stay for this example with Arial, which is a TrueType font, so you also can use them here. For bold, I want to use a really bold variant, for example, Arial Black. And then we go to Italic. And for this, we use the standard Italic, I think. And then we have bold and Italic. And this is this one. If you want to have it easier, like I've said, at the end of the tutorial, we talk about a free add-on, which gives you the option to do that here automatically. But now we want to see how to change now the font inside of the text object. For this, we go again into the edit mode. And if you now go over your text with your arrow keys or with special keyboard shortcuts, which you can read up in the help file of Blender, I can now select, for example, the word Blender here. And now I have here a little font menu and keyboard shortcuts. Control B, for example, for bold, Control I, and so on. And now I can make this here, for example, bold. And now we have a bold Blender here. And let's go here to the numbers and change this with Command I to italic. And now I can go out of the whole thing. And now you see we have changed the font, and it's still beveled and it's still extruded. Another cool trick which you sometimes need is how to work with materials inside of a font object. So let's render this really fast. I go here to the viewport shading material preview so that we see the materials. And then we go here to the materials, and here we can add a material. So this material should be, let's say, greenish. Ooh, not so nice. But it's demonstration purpose. Yeah, I stay with blue. It's better. But I want to change here this numbers to a different material. So for this, we add a new material slot. Click new, and I name this red, for example. And then I can change this also to red. Question arises, how to add this now? Easy answer is selections. So if you are not used to work with material slots here, I will talk about material slots inside of Blender in one of the following tutorials. So watch out for this, but in the moment we go now into this text here again, and I select now with my arrow keys and shift these values here. And now I select the slot of the material, it's red here, and assign it. And that's it. If you now look here, you see This here is now slot number 2, and the rest is the default slot number 1. And so you can add as many materials as you like here in your list. And this is a really easy approach for changing materials here. So let's talk a little bit about text which are inline or inside of boxes, because we want now to change a little bit the parameters of the text. So first, go to paragraph. This is a line text, so we don't use a text box in the moment, and so we don't have all the options. We have here under alignment, the horizontal alignment, left, center, right. And then we also can change your justify and flush if you have more than one line. But for this, I normally use text boxes. And the same is here for vertical. So if you want to align something vertical, you also can do it here. Then we have the spacing of our text. So let's go back here to the text and change first the character spacing. You see now it get more or less spacing. We also have a word spacing for this here and a line spacing if you have more than one line. And you can move the text inside of its boundaries. This can be cool for animation purposes. So I set this back. And I said that we also have text boxes. So let's look into that here. What is a text box? If you open this now, you will see that we have one text box active all the time. But this text box has a size of 0 here. And this means we don't use the text box. How do we see the text box? If you go to the edit mode, and I place the cursor with my end position here at the end, and I remove the grid for a moment, you will see that in the moment we see nothing here around the text. But in the moment I increase now the size of the text box, you see my text suddenly wraps and I get here this dotted line. So this is the width of the text box, and now we can go to Y and also open a Y size of the text box, something like that. And then we can move the text box. So we have one text box inside of this text object. And if you need more than one text box, we can add it here. So we add another text box. It's still the same text object. So it's like in a program like, for example, InDesign, where we have different text boxes and they flow into the next one. So it's a stack of text boxes here. And this new text box gets the same values of size and offset here like the first one. So we change now the offset and place it here, for example, at the side. And now you see if this text box is too small, it flows over into this text box here. And this is a really useful technique which you can use. And you also can tell here the system how the overflow works. You can say, I want to have a standard overflow, or I always want to scale to fit, or I want to cut it. So if I remove now the second text box and I say I want to scale to fit, you see it now fits always inside of the text box. Really cool. Let's get rid of the text box options. So I reset them to 0 here. And I go now out here of the edit mode again. Okay. And what I want to show you now is how to place a text on a curve. It's not the most used technique, because if you want to place text on a curve or around a curve, we normally use, for example, a curve modifier. But it still works also in the classic way, so I want to demonstrate this. So I place my 3D cursor here, Shift A to add a curve. Let's take a Bezier curve here. Here it is. And now I can go into edit mode. I select, for example, this point here. I grab it over and I take this point here, grab it here. Maybe I change here a little bit the tangents. And that's it. Now we have our curve here. And now we can select our text, go to the text options, and you have to go, I think somewhere here where it is. Yeah, under font transform. So we don't need the paragraph, or let's go to paragraph and center it around its pivot point. And then we can go here, text on curve, and we take our picker and say, place it here on the curve. And now you see the text is on the curve here. And now you can change, if you like, the curve itself. So if you go now here, you see now your text is moving on the curve like expected. Okay. Now we have seen many options how we can change the text, how we can set the text here. The question now is, can we now convert the text to something useful? Because I want to model with it later or something like that. We have two options of bringing the text into other objects types of Blender. For this, I select the text object and then we go here to Object and there's a Convert to menu. And we convert now this text here to another curve. You see, convert to curve from a mesh. And if you do that here, and I lose here, like expected here, my curve. So get rid of that. This here is now curve data. You see it's here now curved. And if you now select this and you go here to curve and you go to geometry, you see we have still our options here from the text. So we can still change the extrusion or the bevel. So it's really flexible. And one of the advantages to have it now like that here is if you now go to the edit mode, you are now in the edit mode of a curve. And you can now go here, for example, take this point and you can grab it now if you like. For example, if you now take this point here, grab it out, and you can make funny things with these curves here. So this is one idea of working with that. So curve data. And let's go back here until we are back in the text itself. There it is. This is our text here. And then I can select this here again, go to Object, Convert to, but this time we want to convert it to a mesh from curve, meter, surf, or text. The moment I do that, you see now this mesh icon here. And we can get rid of the Bezier curve. And if you now select this here and go to edit mode, you see this here is now polygon data. And you can work now with the polygon data. You see that these surfaces here look a little bit ugly, and this maybe is not a problem for you, but in some cases when you want to use, for example, deformers later, these triangles are a little bit ugly, and the question is, how can we deal with that? We can deal with that in different approaches. We can do it on the text object if we like, or we can do it now. And what I want to do is I go back here until I see my text. Yeah, here we are. And this here is a text object or curve-based object, but we still have modifiers. Not so many like on polygon objects, but we have some here. And if you now want, you can go in here and remesh this curve. So let's do that. And the moment I do that, it looks really terrible, I know. So you see it looks like that here. But to see better what's going on, you can now go into these options here. And first we have to remove the disconnected pieces. So now we have all the pieces which this algorithm does. Otherwise, it thinks that these chunks are not important. And to make it now nicer, we can go in here and change the Octree depth. So if you increase now the Octree depth, you will see that you get a better and better result. And you do it until you come to the point, be careful. Yeah, I think maybe 8 will do it. Okay, we come to a point where the text is readable again. And if you now go in here and apply the whole thing, you see this is not applicable in the moment. Okay, but if you go now here to Convert to, and back here to Polygons World, and now you go into the polygons, you see, wow, we get a wonderful remeshed mesh with equal spaced polygons here, and this is now suitable for deforming. So this is the way where you start with the text object modifier on the text object and you go over, but you also can remesh the result you get after converting and then you remesh it. So both ways are possible. So now we are nearly at the end of this tutorial, and like promised, I want to show you how to make it easier to work with text objects inside of Blender, because you maybe don't want to add every font by hand. For this, there's a really nice add-on. It's a free add-on, which I now want to activate. So I go to Edit Preferences into my add-ons, and what I need now is the Font Selector add-on. And if you don't find it in your list, because you have to download it, I want to show you in a moment how to get it, but in my case I've installed it, so first I show it. So you search for the font selector, and if you open it, you get some information here, and also thanks to the author here to providing this really great helper. You tick it here, now it's activated. And then you have to add here your font folder. So you click here, say I want to have a font folder here. You go here to your system fonts one time, you say accept, save it in your preferences so that you don't have to do it again and again. And then you can use this plugin now. So let's go here, say I want to have a text again. You go to the text options, and instead of now changing the fonts here, like we have done it before, you have now here a new section which is named Font Selection. Okay, because I've now activated it, you have to refresh my list of fonts. So I do that really fast. You see it takes a while. Okay, now the system has read all my fonts in the font folder, and yeah, now you can select what you want to have. So I select my text again, and this time I want to use, for example, Scott. You see here now the Scott font. I select this font now, and you see the text is directly converted to Scott. And what this plugin now or add-on does is it changes here the fonts directly in this list. So it's a really great helper. I like it, thanks to the programmer. So that's the end for today. If you have more questions about Blender and how you achieve different kind of effects, which you normally do in Cinema or other 3D applications, please let me know. We also have a Patreon channel if you like. My name is Helge Maus from pixeltrain. Have fun and see you again.